It's been more than a decade since Nevadans approved the medicinal use of marijuana, and still the state has failed to come up with a means of dispensing it as the law provides. And now, some politicians, surprisingly on both sides of the aisle, are suggesting Nevada go a step further and legalize pot for adults. One candidate for Congress is making it the foundation of his campaign. Dr. Stephen Frye is running in the Democratic primary for Congressional District 3. He wants to legalize pot and create jobs from industrial hemp production. He joins us along with Derek Washington from the Stonewall Democratic Club of Southern Nevada. He says since his positive diagnosis of HIV, he'd probably be dead if not for marijuana. Can a pot-peddling politician, try saying that, be taken seriously? Well, we'll hear from an expert from the Progressive Democrats of Nevada, too. But first, Derek Washington and Dr. Frye join us. Welcome to the program. I should say you're working with him in his campaign, too. You're trying to help him.
Correct.
Just so people don't get the wrong idea here. Not that anybody could ever get the wrong idea about Derek Washington. All right, Dr. Frye, you've been running on this platform before. We had you on the program a long time ago.
Correct.
You've been talking about it. Are you making any headway? Are people starting to listen?
I am getting an incredible response. I think people are finally fed up with the drug war. We have not had one single victory in it. You can get over an addiction, you never get over a conviction. That's the bottom line right there. People get into drugs, and the reason they get into drugs is because of the dealers. We have to end our drug war. We have to end our war on the environment with industrial hemp. We have to end our war on women. And all of these things I'm getting just a tremendous response on. It's blowing me away.
How many candidates in this country have been elected on a legalized pot platform?
I'm sure I would be the first.
But you know, I'm not going to portray you as a wacko or anything like that. You know why?
Right.
Let's look at how the polling has changed on this. A Gallup survey in October of 2011 asked a random sampling of more than 1,000 adults whether or not they think marijuana should be legalized. The survey found a record high 50% of Americans support the legalization of marijuana, while 46% are opposed to the idea. It's not just far-left progressives like you anymore, sir. This is becoming more mainstream. Have you picked up on that?
Well, absolutely. That's the only reason I'm working with Dr. Frye. I feel that it's time. Everybody knows the drug war is over. We can't win. It's just like prohibition. It's done. It's hurting communities of color. It's hurting people with diseases. It's just hurting everybody. It's hurting our country's treasury. It's just hurting everything.
I guess what I'm wondering about, though, is, as I mentioned earlier, medicinal marijuana passed more than a decade ago. You probably know, since you've actually used it, how hard it is to actually get it, because they've screwed the whole thing up through the legislative process. But you would think if medicinal marijuana can get through the voters, maybe legalizing pot could get through Nevada voters. What do you think?
I'm amazed at how many people have a grandmother or an uncle or not who's benefited from medicinal marijuana, and they don't have that same stigma attached to it. My own mother had it. She didn't want me using it. And so I was stuck with OxyContin. I was stuck with morphine. And those things gave me an addiction that was just horrible. I couldn't sleep. I was always miserable. I begged her to let me have medicinal marijuana. She got me Marinol. That was even worse. Until finally she broke down. First time I was able to actually sit down and eat a meal.
You know, it's interesting, Dr. Frye, how mainstream this has become. In fact, it seems that both parties have been talking about this. Here in Nevada, one of them has it in a platform, and Angela Damon actually wrote a piece recently about the unlikely support for the once taboo subject from the GOP. To wit, Assembly Minority Leader Pat Hickey, who's a Republican from Reno, floated the idea this month of decriminalizing some drug offenses to save money on incarceration. Then, the Nevada Republican Party's new chairman, Michael McDonald, told a Republican podcast host recently, quote, "There's a good argument for legalizing pot." And last month, a contingent of the Republican delegates at the Washoe County Convention tried and failed, because time ran out to debate it, to insert a plank supportive of legalizing marijuana in the party's platform. A man before his time. A visionary you are, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And marijuana is the safest recreational, over-the-counter, or prescription drug in history. You simply cannot die from marijuana medically. Now, the DEA can shoot you, and you can get killed in prison, but those are not pharmacological deaths. And not only that, but crime goes way down when you legalize drugs, and other crime goes down because marijuana is a much better, safer, milder drug than alcohol. Our child abuse death rates, our rape rates, our crime rates are many, many times higher than the Netherlands and Portugal, where they've had legal drugs now for a long time. Alcohol is an inciting drug. Marijuana is a mellowing drug. There are so many benefits that I put in my book. I was a former medical school professor, a physician. I don't do drugs. I've done marijuana half a dozen times where I'm in places where it was legal. And if it were legal, I would have it instead of a glass of wine.
Never done it illegally?
I would, of course I have.
Okay.
Well, our last three presidents did it illegally.
We have Metro here.
Our last three presidents have done it illegally also. I did it once or twice in this country.
I think our president didn't inhale, though.
Well, it could be. I did.
Let me ask you, one of the arguments, people always compare pot and alcohol, sir. What about the argument that there'd be a terrible black market for this? The kids would get it more easily if it's legalized. What do you think about that?
I'll tell you something that Dr. Frye actually said to me that made so much sense. If heroin were legal tomorrow, would you run out and buy some and do it?
Well, heroin, but that's apples and oranges, isn't it?
It's a drug that has been banned. It's a drug that's considered illegal and immoral. So how many people
much more dangerous than marijuana, though.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the point is, if you're not inclined to, you're not inclined to. If someone goes, I tried a cigarette once. I smoked one cigarette. It wasn't for me. I went on about my way. Cigarettes cause many, many, many more deaths and much more money in healthcare costs than marijuana ever would.
When we come back, we have to take a break. When we come back, and we'll talk about the argument law enforcement always brings up to stop the legalization, and that's that it's a gateway drug. I have a feeling Dr. Frye might pick up a chapter from his book and start reading it.
You got it.
We're going to talk more about that, and later we'll have a progressive Democrat to talk about whether this is a good idea for a politician to be running on